What's up, everybody? We're here for another episode of The Rockies Have Eyes. I'm your host, James Gill. Lad is out again this week. Miss you, buddy. So this is an episode that I'm really excited about. I'm going to be talking about the films of the great Wes Craven. And not just any films of his, because he's got plenty of them that everyone knows are great. Any fan of the genre, anyway. But this one is about some of his overlooked films, including one that I've actually quite overlooked on this show, funny enough, but we'll get to that. Just a bit of an introduction. Wesley Earl Craven was born in Ohio in 1939. He was raised in a strict Baptist family. He was not allowed to watch movies, actually, except for Walt Disney films growing up. So who knew that guy would grow up to be one of the great horror directors of all time? And one of the things about him is that it's been said that he helped change the genre in a big way 3 different times, in 3 different decades. In the 70s, he did the film The Last House on the Left, his first film, and it helped bring horror into a really gritty era. Up until that point, the genre had been mostly dominated by films, the Hammer horror films, which took place back in centuries past. Last House on the Left felt like it could be taking place that very day. And it had a documentary-like quality. Again, the Hammer films, very artistic. And even others, non-Hammer films, like Psycho, Peeping Tom, they were very artistically done. You had a sense of the camera being there. Last House on the Left just felt like a documentary. The camera did not cut away, which was something that just wasn't done at the time. Along with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which came out 4 years earlier, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which came out 2 years later, it really helped establish that cinema verite approach to horror. And then, funny enough, the gritty stripped-down approach was what he helped create in the 70s. Well, by the mid-1980s, that had kind of run amok. It seemed like everyone and their mother was running around making a film about a guy with a knife. So, in 1984, Craven takes the slasher film and adds a supernatural twist to it with A Nightmare on Elm Street, created the iconic character Freddy Krueger, and really just kick-started the subgenre when it was running on fumes. And to this day, the name Freddy Krueger, even people who've never seen any of the films, no interest in watching them, they know the name Freddy Krueger. And Craven was the guy that originated it. And so by the mid-90s, once again, the approach Craven had taken had run its course, had become old hat. So he makes a film called Scream, which kind of self-referentially turns the slasher genre on its ear. And after that, every horror film practically felt like it wanted to be Scream. Not a big fan of the Scream clones, but the original's a classic. There's no way around it. And when asked him, people talk to me about what makes Craven special among his peers. He brought a real literary quality. I mean, he could get as harsh and gritty as anyone you could ever hope for, but there was still a literary feel to it. Makes sense. The guy grew up reading classic books, classic literature. He's a professor of. He studied English in college. So anyway, but we'll get into how some of that ties into some of his lesser appreciated work after the break. Which we'll be right back here on The Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV. Welcome back to the Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV. And so we're going to dive into our first underappreciated film of Wes Craven, and the one that leapt to mind when I thought about doing this was his 1991 film, The People Under the Stairs. It's everything that's great about Craven rolled into one. It has symbolism. That was a really common thing of the directors of that time. But George Romero, John Carpenter, who Craven was often compared to, there's even a line in Scream. A character says, "This is starting to feel like something out of a Wes Carpenter film." But, so there's heavy symbolism. There's a lot of commentary on how the poor minorities in underprivileged communities are treated. But that symbolism, while being there and while clearly being heartfelt, never squashes the story. It never starts feeling like a sermon, which is something that Craven was always really adept at least in the films where he was trying. Because let's be honest, Craven had a few films where, not really. He even admitted that he was just going for the check. But when his heart was in it, he balanced symbolism with entertainment value as well as any director I've seen in horror or any other genre. So that was effective. You can hopefully get a taste of that. We have the trailer for The People Under the Stairs, and hopefully you get a little bit of a taste of that.
In every neighborhood, there is one house that adults whisper about and children cross the street to avoid. Now, Wes Craven, creator of A Nightmare on Elm Street, takes you inside.
Something's in there.
We gotta get out of here, Leroy.
All sorts of rumors about what goes on in that house. The police never took it serious.
She's been feeding that thing between the walls again.
I'm very, very tense about this.
There must be another way out.
Can't get out. No one ever has.
What goes on in this house is a sin.
Your father's one sick mother, you know that? Actually, your mother's one sick mother, too.
But what goes on under the stairs is a nightmare.
It is time to clean house. Don't put me in there! Let's go!
Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs.
People are not quite what you might think. And that leads into another point about this film. There are about a dozen different points throughout the film where I could see it easily devolving into cliche. Like I said, it's making some serious points about things that were, especially in the news at the time with race riots and things that were going on. But as many opportunities as it has where it could easily devolve into cliche, it never does. It keeps you on your toes. Like I said, the people themselves, the people under the stairs, are not what you'd think. It takes them in a completely different direction from what you'd expect in most horror films. This family in the house, also not what you'd think. A lot more twisted than you even might expect, and that you also might suppose that the main character Fool, the child that's trying to get out of the house, would go on this stereotypical vigilante rampage at the end. It comes close to that, but with an interesting twist. So Craven was able to, again, as well as he ever has, just balance so many different elements, and it comes together beautifully. This is a movie that you would never have to twist my arm to get me to watch, and a lot of people kind of overlook it. I think they went in expecting it to keep to those cliches a lot more than it actually did. So again, if you have the opportunity, check this one out. There's, again, at the beginning, it might feel like it's going to become a sermon on race relations or about the way the rich treat the poor. It's so much more than that. And it's for people to overlook it, especially even Craven fans. It just really surprises me. It's kind of funny. His previous film was 1989's Shocker, and that one, he in my opinion anyway, he let the message get a little bit in the way of the story. The message did overtake the story a little bit. Shocker's still an entertaining movie. I have a lot of friends who love it, but his previous one had let it get away with a little bit, so I can understand why some people might have expected his next one to. In my opinion, he corrected it beautifully. People Under the Stairs from 1991, absolutely a Craven film that's worth checking out. But coming up next, we're going to get into a sequel, which is one of my favorite horror sequels of all time. It's a very unconventional sequel, but it's really effective. And we'll get into it, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, here on The Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV. Back here on The Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV, and up next we're talking about Wes Craven's 1994 film, appropriately titled Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And to fully appreciate this one, there needs to be a little bit of context. Craven created A Nightmare on Elm Street. He was fairly unknown outside of horror circles at that time. And A Nightmare on Elm Street just blew up. Freddy Krueger became an icon. And throughout the rest of the 80s, he was as big as any character created in that decade. But by 1991, the series was running on fumes. The low point of the series, in my opinion, was 1991's Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which was... I could do a whole segment on how bad that movie was. And it was horrible to think that such a great, iconic horror character would go out on such a lousy note. So after that, they decided to get in touch with Freddy's creator, who had not directed a film since the first one. He co-wrote the first draft of Nightmare 3, but that was it. He'd stayed out of the series. And we have the trailer for New Nightmare, and then I think I'll let you watch that, and then we'll go into what makes this movie so special.
Nightmares come in different forms, at different times, for different reasons. Now, Wes Craven, the man that knows them better than anyone, is bringing you something new.
Can you hear me? You've got to fight it. Whatever it is that's after you, and come back to me. You can't make it alone.
I'm afraid Dylan should stay with us until we know what's causing these episodes, Ms. Langenkamp. I'm sure you understand.
Miss me?
Missed you, Freddy, more than even you know. That series had devolved so far. After the farce that was Freddy's Dead, it seemed impossible that Freddy could ever be effective again. But this movie threaded a very tough needle. Obviously you can't make Freddy mysterious anymore. He's both in the films he's been explained too much, and it feels like there were Freddy Krueger Happy Meals at McDonald's. It just didn't work. But this one managed to take Freddy, put a new spin on it. He comes out of the film world and comes after Heather Langenkamp, the actress that played Nancy, the star of the first film. And this just breathed a whole new life into the series. At least enough, it was a good closing point. It frankly probably should have been the last one, though we did have to get Freddy versus Jason, and then a remake that shouldn't be mentioned. But the way this film was able to both be a Nightmare on Elm Street film, a film that absolutely feels like it belongs in the series, and also kind of comment on them, I actually think it does the self-referential thing a little bit better than Scream does, which a film I'm absolutely a fan of. But New Nightmare balances those two things beautifully. It's well acted. Robert Englund plays both himself, and he's not really Freddy in the film. It's a demon that's taken the form of Freddy, but he fills his shoes quite admirably while putting a sleeker twist on the character. Miko Hughes, the child who had played Gage in Pet Sematary, plays Heather Langenkamp's son. I actually met him. He's about my age. I met him at Texas Frightmare Weekend this year. Side note, so many famous child actors, when you meet them once they're adults, you can tell they're a little embarrassed to be there representing films that they did as children. Miko Hughes, not like that at all. He is very proud of the work he did, even as a young man. But his approach, he plays beautifully into the film. There's a metaphor of the Hansel and Gretel story. Heather, I was about to call her Nancy. She feels like Nancy from the first one. Reads him Hansel and Gretel at the beginning, and it plays well in the ending. The ending is a little overdone compared to how understated the film is, but it's absolutely worth checking out and being appreciated for what it is, rather than expected to just be another nightmare film. And so we're coming up into a break, and the next movie is one that you might be surprised to find out I have never talked about at length on this show. I've mentioned it, but that's about it. And we'll get into that here on The Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV. We're back here on The Rockies Have Eyes, and here on our 11th episode, I'm finally about to do a segment on a little film called The Hills Have Eyes. Unbelievable it's taken me this long to get to this movie, but hey, well, what can I say? It's been worth the wait. I guess we'll just start out by going straight into the trailer for the film. It was from 1977, Wes Craven's second film.
They wanted to see something different, but something different saw them first. The Hills Have Eyes.
Mister, don't take your family back in that area. The silver has been gone for 40 years now. Besides, there's nothing back in there but animals.
We're lost. The old creep told you not to get off the road.
What began as a vacation ended as a nightmare.
Be hell to pay now.
What was that?
She thought she knew what the world was all about, but nothing prepared her for this. The Hills Have Eyes.
Oh, you going with my baby?
Get out of the way, Dick.
A mother fighting for her child loses it in the worst possible way.
I hit him with a tire iron and I split his face wide open. That was a bad mistake. I come back for you later, girlie. Why are you doing this?
The story of an American family who lost everything except the will to survive. Murdered, raped, burned, but not beaten. The Hills Have Eyes. The story of one family's refusal to die.
I'm gonna get those animals.
The Hills Have Eyes. A night of terror. A day of vengeance where no one was spared. No one.
Kill the babe! Kill me!
They fought back. Anything was a weapon. The family dog to the family car.
It's working!
The Hills Have Eyes. The most shocking, terrifying film you will ever see, by Wes Craven, writer and director of The Last House on the Left. The Hills Have Eyes. The lucky ones died first.
What it says on the back of my hoodie. I love this movie. What can I say? I named my show roughly after it. The film, for anyone who doesn't know, is based on the story of the Shawnee Bean family from, I think, the 16th century in England. It was a cannibalistic, marauding family, lived in a cave that was not visible during high tide. So they kidnapped people and did what you'd expect cannibals to do. But the thing about it was, once the royal military finally found them and got them, what civilized society did to them wasn't a whole lot more civilized than what they'd been doing. So this movie explores that dynamic of human nature, and it's just, and there are lots of layers. The patriarchal leader of each family, because they're so unwilling to have their authority questioned, that creates about 90% of the problems in this film. And so I could spend a whole show unpacking that. But there's just so much going on beneath the surface. The trailer is not my favorite, honestly. It played up, I get it, it's supposed to be a 70s horror film. It played up the more tawdry elements, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface of this movie. And sadly, it seems to be overlooked by a lot of people. I've even had people try to tell me that the 2006 remake was better than the 77 version. The remake is better in the same way that Armageddon is a better film than Citizen Kane. Its effects are more modern, that's it. But With this film, his second one, now 5 years between his first film and second film may seem like a long time for Craven. Honestly, he was trying to get out of the horror genre. He did not want to do another horror film. But once he decided to do it, he went up, found the story of the Shawnee Bean family, the historical precedent, played off that, and made just a really well-rounded film. Last House on the Left had a lot of symbolism to it too, but this one proved that you could have that gritty documentary-like feel, but just be a little more polished. His filmmaking, just around the edges, was a little less rough, and it ended up coming together beautifully. This film has some of Craven's best villains. Craven is known, I mean, Freddy Krueger obviously, Ghostface from Scream, Horace Pinker from Shocker, the infamous police chief from Serpent and the Rainbow. Craven has so many great villains that he's crafted that both stand in for something and, as I said, deliver the goods as far as entertainment. And the Farrell family from The Hills Have Eyes is as good as any of them. You know, Papa Jupiter, the leader, the iron fist he rules his family with, and the way that his children are so terrified of him that it makes them all the more aggressive and harsh toward the civilized family. The levels going on there are just, it's wonderful to watch if you want to watch it on that level. So, and then the fact that the civilized family is only there because the dad refused to slow down the car. If they hadn't crashed, none of this would have happened. Or Papa Jupe's father, if he had, raised his child, dealt with his child instead of hitting him in the face with a tire iron and leaving him in the desert, then really none of it would have happened. The cannibalistic family wouldn't have been out there in the first place. So there's all this stuff to unpack. So some of the acting is a little rough around the edges, but it gets the point across quite well. It's my second favorite horror film of all time, behind Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead, which, interestingly enough, they're tied together a bit. In the scene inside the trailer, where the Farrell family attacks them and kidnaps the baby, at one point, Mars, one of the children, tears in half a Jaws poster, as in to say that like Jaws is half as scary as Hills Have Eyes is. Well, in the basement in The Evil Dead, there's a Hills Have Eyes poster torn in half. So, fun little tie-in there. So anyway, this has been a look at Craven this week. We'll be back here next week on The Rockies Have Eyes, talking more horror here from the Belmar Shopping Center, the Colorado Media School. So tune in then to The Rockies Have Eyes on Mile High TV. See you then.